Okay,
We will
so
see.
we are missing AWOL today. As you guys may have noticed, he's out sick. Hopefully not with COVID-19. I don't think that that's the case, so don't worry too much.
I sure hope not. Gosh.
I really hope not too. Yeah, I think he would have told us otherwise. He just said he's feeling a bit under the weather, so we're taking over today. So, welcome to the show. Today we want to talk about how to fail successfully. What are we talking about here, Ross?
I think we're going to talk about the best way to fail in life. That sounds incredibly inspirational and motivational. But the truth is, like you said before we went on air, everybody's going to fail. You just need to learn how to fail. You need to learn why failure can actually be your best friend. Am I wrong?
No, you're right there. So we're doing this podcast coming from the perspective of people who have been successful, which is funny because I feel like I have mostly not been successful in my career. So most of the time, the big projects I would try to do or I would try to undertake, and especially the ones I would spearhead on my own, would fail. In fact, I'm pretty sure every single one of them has failed miraculously. The thing is, they've all led me somewhere to where I am today, to where I've gained so much experience having tried so many things and failed that I actually started to get kind of good at it. Here's a great example. This is probably 6 or 7 years ago, I started, and I've been over this story. If you guys are longtime listeners, you probably have heard a little bit of this story before. I started a fan site for Star Wars: The Old Republic called Red Rancor. And I ran this by myself. It was a full website with social media. I did my own vlog, news style updates on video on YouTube at the same time as well. And I did this primarily by myself until after a while I saw another creator, a YouTuber out there doing stuff in the same space. His name was Andrew Wall. And I reached out to him and called him on the phone after I emailed him and said, hey, you're really good at doing audio. You sound great. Your microphone is really, really good. You've got that kind of great caster style. I'm really good at the editing, visual element part of it, but not so good at that. Can we combine efforts and make something really high quality? So yeah, the answer was yeah, and we worked there from there. Eventually, that project failed. We live streamed Star Wars: The Old Republic. The game launched. My fan site did not do nearly as well after it launched, and ultimately that project died, and I had to abandon it. And a bunch of cool things came from this. I know this is kind of story time here, but the idea is learning from your mistakes. And this is how you fail successfully, because every time you fail, it gets you closer to succeeding because you've learned how to do what you were doing in a way that works instead of doesn't work, because you've learned how it doesn't work. So I learned it's great to cover a game before it launches. You can capitalize on all the hype, but you're really banking on the game being successful post-launch. And Star Wars: The Old Republic was never as big as I guess we all wanted it to be, and I ended up moving on to other projects. However, I maintained a working relationship with Andrew Wall and getting into TGN at that point in time. So that whole project was my entry point into a gaming startup, which was super cool. TGN was really awesome the whole way through, especially though in the beginning. If you guys have never been in a startup, especially a tech or a gaming startup, they are incredibly fun, albeit kind of low paying and risky, obviously. But the energy and the excitement can be super, super fun. So from there, I formed a ton of different business relationships. I got a ton of experience in social media. And now I'm, here today able to talk about all this different experience because I failed, right? But because you went on the journey to begin with, you met people, you worked with people, you did some cool stuff even though you failed. That's the thing. Even though you fail, you've achieved things that did work, just ultimately maybe the project as a whole didn't work. So Ross, what's a good example of maybe something that's maybe a little bit different from the gaming space, or maybe yours is all gaming too.
Oh, I can take you down some roads here.
Okay, because one thing, and if you don't have this, like maybe speak to one of your favorite ones that you've learned from, and then I want to get to like what happens when you get turned down when you're like looking for a client, right?
Yeah, and by the way, that's going to happen. I'll hit on mine in a second, but what percent, like when you're trying now, a lot of people are doing the work from home remotely. Obviously, that's why we're doing this. When you're reaching out and trying to get clients, what percentage of them would you say you actually get?
Not a low percentage.
Right.
Out of the ones that I like talk to, yeah, I would say like less than 50%. I would say probably like maybe less than 25% realistically.
Yeah. I think the average number, just based on what I've talked to people, is about 10%. It's almost the same as getting a sale, which you essentially are.
Yeah. So if it's that low, right, and like let's say the fire is lit, like we're in lockdown during coronavirus, you don't have a job, you have no means of paying for anything, you didn't have a whole lot of backup money. And so like, it's really, really imperative that you get something, and you're putting yourself out there, you're trying to find clients, and you just aren't getting anything. And like let's say you're just getting nothing. You aren't even getting the opportunity to talk to people. What, at that point of failure, with that much pressure behind it, what do you do in that situation? What would be like your go-to, Ross?
Good question. That actually kind of fits in right to my story, which is a little bit different. It's not even necessarily in the creator space. This is from back when, and this is a great example of failing. And I don't tell this story to brag or anything like that. I tell because failure, if you look at failure as a bad word, you're going to have a bad reaction to it. If you look at failure as a lesson, then you learn from your lessons, and then you can use your lessons in the next venture over, or if you continuing on in this venture, it's just one more thing that you can cross off your list of ways not to do it, or how can I do it better? The famous example is Thomas Edison. I think he said that, he had 10,000 tries before he finally decided to steal the idea from Tesla on how to make the light bulb. But at the end of the day, it does take 10,000 tries before you get to an answer, whether or not he was a dick. So in my story, this is back when I was actually doing stand-up comedy. I used to be a comedy hypnotist. I trained for several years before I finally took the stage. I did a lot of colleges and small gigs like that. The very first comedy club that I ever headlined, and it was just me. It was just my comedy hypnosis show. It was down in Memphis, I believe. And this was a big deal for me because it wasn't an A room. It was like a B room, but it was a nice comedy club. There was probably 150, 200 people there. I was doing 2 nights. I was doing a Friday and I was doing a Saturday night. And so first time ever doing a comedy club. I'm just ecstatic.
I bet you're full of nerves though, right? Like
yeah.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. You're all that was, that's something that when I was in high school, my theater teacher always told me that the day that you are not nervous before you go on and do a gig is probably the day that you need to consider doing something else. Nerves are part of it. Nerves motivate you. And, that can be said in the same when you're about to jump on a sales call with somebody or you're about to make a pitch to a client. You should be nervous. Use those nerves to your advantage because that means you're going out of your comfort zone. You're going into a new space where you're going to learn something new and be able to apply it to the rest of your life. But for this story in particular, I remember it was a sold out crowd. It was the day before Valentine's Day. And I went on stage as a hypnotist to do my hypnosis show. And as soon as I walked on the stage, I could just feel like there was something off. I didn't know what it was. I didn't know if it was me. I didn't know if it was with the crowd. But needless to say, I did my hypnosis show by asking for volunteers. I didn't pick people because, the whole point of hypnosis show is to hypnotize the people in the crowd. So I had a bunch of people come up. And the show that I did was designed around, I needed at least 5 to 10 people to, really put on a good show. And that night I got one person hypnotized. And I had never been in that situation before. I hadn't prepared for that situation before, which was my fault. And the show ended up, it was supposed to be an hour and a half long show. And the show ended up at 50 minutes before I finally had to cut it just because I was out of ideas what to do with this one person hypnotized. And needless to say, the people there were not happy. This was a sold out show, 150. Everybody was pissed. The club manager was pissed. I remember the club manager walked up to me after the show and he just looked at me and he was just kind of in shock. He's like, what the hell happened? And I didn't have an answer. Anyway, went back, couldn't sleep that night. The next morning, my manager called me up and just ripped me a new one. Like, rightfully so. He just destroyed my soul in that moment.
Oh my God.
And needless to say, I still had one more show that night. So I had to get myself in the right set of mind. And when you have a failure like that, you need to make sure that you're in the right set of mind. You need to make sure that your next steps are not trying to cover your ass. You need to own up to everything that just happened, because that's the only way you're going to be able to fully take away a lesson of failing. So I spent that entire day just going over the show step by step, every little detail. I went to the club manager that night before the show, said, hey, let's make things right. Whatever my pay is from tonight, cover last night. Give all those people free tickets to come back. We'll do another show, another time, and they can come back. He agreed. And that night, just because I was in so much focus and I had gone back and watched the tape of myself failing over and over, which if you're not familiar with watching a tape of yourself suck on a stage and just completely bomb, it is awful. It is miserable. And so I did that the entire day, got everything set. And that night I just demolished the place. It was one of the best shows I ever did. And the club manager came up to me after that show. And we sat down, we talked for a while. He's like, yeah. He's like, after last night, I completely thought about canceling tonight. But he's like, one thing that you did absolutely right is you came back. He's like, you came back and you came back prepared. You came back on the right path. You made right by everything that had happened last night. And you came back and you just demolished the crowd tonight. He's like, even if you had done a good show last night, he's like, I wouldn't have recommended you to any other club, but seeing how you handled this situation and how you quote unquote failed successfully, that is, he said, I would recommend you to anybody to do a show now. And that's actually how I got my start. I was able to turn a failing situation into actually lining up more gigs out of it. And so it's not the failure that matters, I guess. And I'll let you comment on this after this, parent. It's not the failure that matters. It's not the situation that matters, but it's how you react. That is everything.
I think if you look at failure in the right way, it becomes an opportunity, right? Every time I've seen someone fail spectacularly, like I'm talking like everyone in like the company knows that they fucked up and it's embarrassing and you're almost like to a degree feel embarrassed for them. I'm not thinking of any particular example specifically, but whenever you see them come back and try again and succeed, I feel like because of that embarrassment, it sets your expectations lower. And then when someone comes back and keeps trying and then they like greatly exceed that, you have a higher opinion then of them than what you started with in the first place. Like having that failure sets this moment where you come back. You have this opportunity to come back and set everything right. And I think to a degree, everybody kind of wants to see that happen. I mean, no one, I get me wrong here. It's fun to watch fails online, funny fails and stuff online. But like generally, I like to watch people succeed and triumph, like and win and things that they're passionate about, right? So watching them come back against, I guess because it's like this adversity thing. Now there's this big adversity, right? Where like you failed. And everybody's seen you fail, especially in the example you're talking about, Ross, where you're like on stage and all these people watch it happen. When you then see you come back and like conquer it, then it's kind of like, okay, that's amazing. Then it's like all of the hero tales, the stories that we tell ourselves, where you have the underdog overcoming something, and that is the sense of that's something that entertains everybody, as us as humans, we love those stories. So for that reason, I think failure is your course kind of to opportunity. I think one of the most important things you talked about was like getting back up and having to own your failure. So take a look at what you've done poorly, accept that you have done that poorly, accept kind of the consequences that people are going to be pissed about it, and it is your fault, and own that instead of don't put the blame on somebody else. You know, it wasn't their fault. Like you know, it wasn't anybody else's fault in your example, Ross, that, you know, you got up there necessarily, even though you didn't get many volunteers, and maybe there were things that were some other people's fault, but like taking ownership of it and making it right. If you don't take ownership of it, then you can't make it right, so you lose the opportunity. So,
right, and that's exactly right. And just to hit on that real quick, when you don't take ownership of it, and even if you look for little pieces and stuff to where you can blame others and kind of write yourself off, that's fine. But that's still not taking ownership of it, because that's always going to happen. There's 90% of the time, there's going to be other places where it is other people's fault, but you still have to take responsibility for that, because it's going to keep happening unless you figure out a way to cover for it in that moment. So to your point, you absolutely have to, you have to be on your game with that. Let me ask you this, and before you get into a project, is it best to go ahead and almost, you can even write out a plan, but do you need to have that? Is it important to have that honest conversation with yourself about, and put a plan in place about what happens when you do fail? We like have something written down, so you're not, so after you do fail and you're emotional, you know, you're anxious, whatever it may be, but to have the steps that you can say, okay, I was of sober mind, I was of smart mind when I did this. Here, when I put these steps together, now here is exactly what I need to do now that I have failed. Is that important?
I don't necessarily have like written down steps. It's just kind of like a learning that I have in my mind of certain things that I'll do post like failure. First of all, is I accept that I have failed. You know, I accept, first of all, that like I didn't do something well, or that maybe I didn't get the client that I wanted. And to a degree, I try to accept my part in that, right? Like maybe it's a situation where you're talking to somebody else and you really want this client and it doesn't work out. I really wanted to use that as an example so that it's relevant here to the topic we've been covering for this past couple of weeks. And they turn you down. Let's say it was over a call where like I just didn't do the call well, and I could tell, right? I first have to accept that my part in that failure. Like, okay, that was a two-way street. I mean, there were both things. Obviously, it didn't work well. There were probably things that on their end that could have worked better, but I had to accept my part, first of all, in that. And I had to accept the way that makes me feel. So I had to accept that, okay, I kind of feel embarrassed, maybe. I kind of feel angry, maybe, about losing that because I really, really, really wanted it. That's, I think, the hardest thing to get past, is if when you really want something and you don't, and you really need it at the same time and you aren't able to get it, it can be devastating kind of to your own self-confidence and things like that. Except that how you feel about it. And it's okay how you feel about it. But then you got to kind of move on real quick, right? I can set, maybe I'm angry and I feel embarrassed, but then I say, okay, got to move on. I got to let those feelings go. And I got to take a look at how could I have done that better, and what are my options now. So again, kind of steps. Post it, accept your part in the failure. Accept how you feel about it. Let those emotions go. And sometimes that can take a little bit more time than just like instant. It takes a lot of kind of emotional self-control and just intuitiveness and self-awareness to be able to just let that go very quickly sometimes. So you give yourself maybe a little bit of space on that. Let those feelings go. And then the final thing is look at what happened. What can you learn from it? And that is the crux of everything here. It's always about, whenever you do fail, what lesson are you taking away? Because if you look at every successful business person entrepreneur, creator out there, where they got to where they are is by learning from their mistakes. So if you are making mistakes and you're not learning, you're not getting ahead. You're not going to get to where you want to be. If you are failing and you are learning from them, then you're doing just what every other successful person has done in the history of the world. So you're fine. We're human beings. We're going to make mistakes. It happens. It's okay. In fact, that's how we get there, right? It's a period of failures until it isn't anymore. And eventually you get to the point where it isn't anymore and you're like, how did I get here? Oh, because you've been on a journey of learning from all the past mistakes. So I think don't be super critical on yourselves. I think that was, for me, that was always my personal thing. I was always really critical on myself because I know I'm capable of a lot. And so when I do fail, it's like, I know I'm better than that. But at the same time, I have to admit to myself that I'm human and I'm going to make mistakes. And now I've gotten to a point where when I do make mistakes, I'm kind of like, cool, what do I get to learn this time? So now, and I feel a sense of progress when that happens because I know that I'm learning something important that's going to help me get back up on the bandwagon, on the train, and keep going. So, that's it. I guess in terms of like my process, is yours something similar there?
Yeah, it's fun. You mentioned time after you do something that fails. You mentioned time that, I think it depends on what it is. Sometimes you're able to, quickly kind of bounce back and say, okay, here's what I did wrong. Sometimes you're forced to. Sometimes, like in my situation, you don't have a choice, whether it was a massive failure, something, incredibly embarrassing. Sometimes you have to immediately bounce back. And that's another struggle on its own. But if it's also important that you don't do anything rash and you don't let your emotions get the best of you when you do that. So after I typically fail, I like to give it, however long it takes. And it doesn't take long. It feels like after you fail, you feel like you're just going to have this feeling forever. And I promise it goes away. But you have let your emotions play out. Don't try and hide any emotions and stuff like that. It's because the more you do that, the more it builds up. Just let it out. Let your frustration out. Let your feelings out. And then after however long that takes, then I reassess my situation. It's interesting because a lot of our audience here are creators, and creators know this. I don't want to say more than anybody, but they know this a lot, that the whole game is based on failure. I mean, how many times does it take to, before you get it right, whether it's, creating thumbnails, whether it's, actually going on air and doing stuff like we're doing right now. The main thing is you have to understand that you're going to fail, but even a better feeling or obvious, anything's better feeling than failure, but you have to realize that also that comes along with failure there comes a sense of pride, and a sense of pride in yourself that you deserve to have, that you just went out of your comfort zone to do something. You went out of your comfort zone to grow. And we are in a situation right now where a lot of creators have lost their jobs. 20 million Americans have filed for unemployment now. A lot of people are now getting into the creator space, maybe not as even necessarily because they want to. It could have been something that, they dreamed about a long time ago. They've always thought that would be fun, but now they don't have a choice when their livelihood is on the line. So the biggest reason that stops people at that point is failure, the fear of failure, the fear of embarrassment. And trust me, it is more impressive to try and fail than to not try at all. And that's kind of where we are in the world today. Is you're in a situation where you've got to try now. You've got to try. Even if this virus has shown us anything, it's that, we need to start. You need to start being more true to yourself. You need to do what you're passionate about. And even if eventually you decide, I'm just not enjoying this anymore, I don't think I'm going to do it, you still have the lessons from everything you did that now you can take into whatever path you decide to go on to next, which is amazing. I'm sure you've had this experience too, where things that you used to do now, because you did them now, it's almost like you can jump into any situation in any job, or whatever it may be. You can just jump in and do it because you have that experience now that other people who you're working with do not.
Yeah, I mean, I don't fear like the failure of going into it necessarily so much because I've already failed. I already know what that feels like.
Right.
So, yeah, I think that's probably a good point to end on here because we have clients to take care of,
Yeah, we do.
So I like that as the last point. Don't fear failing because failing is your path to succeeding, which is why this is called How to Fail Successfully. So if you aren't failing, you aren't learning, and you aren't getting better and you aren't improving. So don't be afraid to fail. Don't be afraid to put yourself out there, to make content, to do what you're passionate about. It's going to be hard at first. It's going to be insanely hard at first. If it weren't, it wouldn't be worth doing. So don't fear it. Get out there, guys. Thanks for watching. If you want to see more, we're on pretty much every podcasting platform. Just look up Digital Drop Podcast or Digital Drop Pod. If you guys have questions or topics that you would like us to address on the show, all you got to do is reply to @DigitalDropPod on Twitter with a video of it. Just take your phone, put your face on camera, ask it. We like to put you guys on the show. So if you have something you want us to cover or a question or maybe something that you're struggling with in terms of making it on your own, let us know. We hope to hear from you. Take care, guys. Have a great day.